Good morning. Nice to see you guys turn out. Thanks. My name's Steve. Still pushing. We're over on mission here today as well. Today we have a tour on Westtown School and Westtown's Quaker tradition, which is going to be given by Joseph Ben from Westtown School. We have other members of the school too, and we're looking forward to a great talk. In November, we had a talk about the notorious murders in Chester County District. Watch for that one as well. So without further ado, here's Joseph.
All right. Well, thank you. So first I should mention Westtown School, the Township's Quaker tradition. I was thinking, okay, how long should I prepare for this? So I had to talk to my students. So Teacher Joseph, so at Westtown School, they call us teacher in first name. Keep it informative, keep it succinct. You know you can go on for hours. So I said, well, maybe I should have notes. Yes, that'll keep you on track. So as you see me review through some notes, keep myself on track, I hope to share with us some fun facts and details as we talk about Westtown School, and especially that intersection with the greater Westtown Township. There are a few folks who I would like to kind of introduce on screen, and they're here today. And really, this is meant to be a partnership. At Westtown School, we really consider so many aspects of our school life is really extending into the community. And these intersections are important. Chris Bembo, our head of school, is here. Just can give a little wave. Ann Burns, our Dean of Communications, is here. And my partner in crime, and sorry for the pun there, Steve, Sarah Mullen is our school archivist. And I really want all of you to consider the four of us as being able to partner with the community. Of course, Chris in his role would be sort of a main partner with the township. But if there are certain questions about the school's history, I certainly encourage you to reach out to Sarah Mullen, who maintains our school archives. And the archives, as you'll see from many of the photos, are really rich and deep. And in my role, I'm actually chair of our History and Religion department. So if there are certain events that you feel, hey, this would be a great way to partner with student life, certainly reach out to me. And I have a stack of some cards that afterwards I can share out. There's one other person among us that isn't on the picture here that I want to mention, a Westtown Township resident, my wife, Inger Hatlin. She didn't know I was going to introduce her. So it's funny, when I'm in the classroom among students, talking, lecturing, debating, discussing, comes pretty easy. At this point, close to 30 years in the classroom, second nature. When I present, I've done a number of presentations, not quite second nature, but still comfortable. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'll move the mic a little closer. Okay. So what's funny is this is the first time.
There.
Is this better? All right. Yes. Thank you, Neela. So this is the first time where I'm giving a lecture and my wife is here. So I'm a little bit more nervous. I had to stop at Wawa and I'm very excited. I'm excited for all of you. I just want to mention a few special things. First of all, to Steve, who has really been engaging with the school on so many levels and with me personally when I've come to the Historical Commission meetings, for Mila, and for the entire Historical Commission, Westtown Township. I really want to thank all of you. This was an invitation that we couldn't turn down. It was a great opportunity. I want to thank the Board of Supervisors. I also want to thank Sarah and everyone in the Westtown School Archives who really helped bring this information together. And I want to thank all of you for coming today. There is one event that my students reminded me of and said, okay, Teacher Joseph, keep it succinct. Later today, so as we depart out of here, perhaps after questions and answers, if you would like to grab some family, some friends, and stop by campus, today is at Westtown School, our Fall Fest, and it runs from 11 to 2. There are games, there's food, a lot of entertainment, and it's a great family-friendly event for everyone within certainly the township and the surrounding area. It's open campus to all of our neighbors. So this talk has what I would call sort of 4 divisions. First, I want to talk a little bit about what I call pre-Westtown. And I mean both pre-Westtown School and even pre-Westtown Township. I want to mention a few remarks and some information about the Lenape roots within our area. And they're very rich, very deep. And recently, I had a student, and I'll talk a little bit more about her, who did some research in coordination with some professors at Westchester University in looking at the Lenape presence. Also, pre-Westtown, we can talk about Quaker arrival. You know, what really jump-started William Penn and his holy experiment, and eventually, Pennsylvania, and how this entire area has some deep Quaker roots. We'll move into some of the factors of establishing a Quaker school within this area. Then we'll move into a few anecdotes, some connections where both Westtown School and the greater area, Westtown Township, really kind of intersect together. And then I'll just conclude with some closing remarks about both Westtown School, Westtown Township today. So when we consider the Lenape roots, there's a Westtown alum who graduated in 2024, and she was a remarkable student of history. She loved history, and she was always driven by the question of, okay, I've gotten to appreciate Westtown School, founded 1799, all of the historic buildings and places, but I'm curious about who was here prior. And we can talk about, well, the Gibbons farm and the presence of thriving, primarily agricultural Quaker community. Okay, but who was here before? Well, actually, the Lenape people. And she conducted a lot of research, and this was actually from a display that she was able to set up. Throughout our township, as well as the surrounding townships, there are a number of arrowheads, scrapers, axe heads, as well as some fragments of fabrics that show the deep roots of Lenape presence. The Lenape were part of a greater linguistic group called the Algonquin group. The Algonquins included the Shawnee people, the Nanticokes, and the Lenape. While within our township, we don't have evidence of, say, a Lenape village, we have plenty of evidence of nearby villages just outside of the township with a presence of some agriculture as well as evidence of hunting. Now, this map, pretty early map from around 1795, subtly shows this aspect of Lenape presence. It's a little bit hard to see, but I'll try to situate us. So many of these maps, rather than being oriented, uh-oh, rather than being oriented north to south, what we notice is the northern end is by the right. So as we look at the line to the right, we'll see the beginning of Goshen, Old Goshen Township, today West Goshen. And then as we scan to the left, that really shows kind of the roots of Street Road 926. So most maps tend to be oriented with west on top and east on the bottom. And we can see the thicker curvy line, that's really the Chester Creek. There's a building, one building, that if you were to look a little bit close to the street roadside, and it's labeled Mansion House. And this was the one structure of the Gibbons family that had been built in the early 1700s, around 1704. And there were certain locations throughout their farm that had subtle names. So we see Walnut Field, we see Orchard Field, and then we can see just towards the center bottom, two names, Indian Spring and Indian Field. And it's believed that this map is indicating an acknowledgement of presence, perhaps where certain arrowhead scrapers, things may have been recovered, of sort of that lasting knowledge of are aware that while we have a farm, we have orchards, we have fields, we know of the Lenape presence that preceded this. Hopefully, these two paintings, or either one, should be familiar to you. The one on the left, and they both were painted by two Quaker artists. The one on the left, from around 1771, was painted by Benjamin West. Benjamin West, he was commissioned by Thomas Penn, son of William Penn. And there had been a long-standing idea of what we assume was a historical event. But because both renderings were painted much later than the actual event, began to develop some mythical elements to it. And both paintings are called Penn's Treaty with the Indians. These are actually renderings from a meeting that was between William Penn and a leader within the Lenape Federation named Tominend. And it was said that at a site within Philadelphia along the Delaware River, a place called Shackamaxon, that these two sides came together and had some obligations. Benjamin West eventually went on to sort of greater prominence, became known worldwide. Edward Hicks who painted the same scene, had local prominence, but really his name hadn't gone out quite as well known and familiar as Benjamin West. Now, I want to read a quote. And like I said, historical event, a little bit of folklore gets wrapped up within any historical event. And then we need to parse out, well, what parts of it have, say, some historical roots and what parts perhaps mythical roots. The reason why I want to mention this quote is that it will really sort of foreshadow some aspects of Quaker presence as well as Quaker belief. And it was said that Tomanin said directly to William Penn, "We will live in love with William Penn and his children as long as the creeks and rivers run and while the sun, moon, and stars still shine." So a beautiful aspirational idea. And we know that the practicalities of growing communities can create difficulty in such aspirations. Sadly, we all know the moment wouldn't last over generations, but it provides a good context to a couple of the core beliefs that we find in Quakerism. And you can see in Hicks's version that even in the mid 1800s, he lifted up this idea of religious liberty in the Commonwealth and a testimony to peace. So as we look at the township, and I have sort of a modern map that I just pulled from Google, and I have it surrounded by historical Friends meeting houses. What you'll notice is that nowhere within Westtown Township was there a meeting house prior to 1799, so prior to the school. Instead, we were really kind of triangulated. We were within a sea of Quaker families who had agricultural roots, farms, who were working really the land, and in a sea of old historical meeting houses. To the corner left, Birmingham Friends Meeting was established in 1690. When we think about Penn's arrival in the mid 1680s, we say, wow, this was one of the earliest meeting houses. Birmingham Friends is especially significant because during the Battle of Brandywine, George Washington had noticed to the south, as British troops were moving northward, he essentially requisitioned the Friends Meeting House and said, this will be a field hospital. George Washington knew that the meeting house sat right at a significant site to the location of the battle. And he also knew, in terms of Quaker sensibilities, that core principle of peace, and sometimes we call it, say, the peace testimony, that the area Quaker community would really find that role of, yes, we will take in and accept those who are injured and perhaps dying in the battle. And Birmingham Friends Meeting has attached to it a cemetery. I'll come back a little bit later to that Friends Meeting House. To the north of us, we're probably familiar with Goshen Friends Meeting, established 1703. And then to the south of us, just a little bit south of Glen Mills, Concord Friends Meeting in 1710. So a good century before the school was established, folks were already aware that this area would potentially be a good place, perhaps, to build a school. They weren't quite saying it at the time, but there's an awareness that this is a larger Quaker community. So I just want you to take a minute, and I'm going to give you a question. Feel free to think about it, maybe turn to a neighbor. I want you to consider, if you only had a few key elements, a few things, what does it really take to establish a school? Okay, yes. You always need that, yes. Students, teachers, and the money is correct. And I'll put it, let's say, in the bucket of some sort of location, some place. I mean, nowadays we have cyber schools, but you can even say, well, that cyberspace is the location. But really, it boils down to those three things. Give us the student, give us the teachers, and then we need some sort of happy place where they can be together. So Westtown School generally attributes the early idea of building a Quaker boarding school within Penn's colony to a letter from a gentleman named George Churchman to Israel Pemberton in about 1761. And within this letter, there was this idea that as Philadelphia was growing, there needed perhaps to be a place where the young could not be quite so corrupted by all of the elements of a bustling big city. It began to jumpstart a series of conversations that are captured in meeting minutes and other writings among the larger umbrella of meeting houses that's called Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. So in 1790, a Philadelphia Quaker named Owen Biddle was among the most prominent of those supporting the idea of a yearly meeting school, a school that could receive young Quaker students from throughout the area. And he published this document that you see on the left called A Plan for a School on an Establishment Similar to That at Ackworth in Yorkshire, Great Britain. Within that pamphlet, he outlined the objectives and operation of a proposed Quaker boarding school. Now, a little backdrop. Ackworth was a British Quaker boarding school in Yorkshire that had been started just about 20 years earlier than Westtown School. Those who might get a chance to visit, if you happen to be, in Yorkshire and you see the two, you'll notice some really remarkable similarities between the buildings. Now, Biddle himself, he's been described as one of the most complicated and interesting Quakers of his day. He came from a prominent Philadelphia family, but due to activities that he and his brother participated in, involving Committee for Pennsylvania Public Safety, which was essentially helping to raise troops for the revolution, Owen Biddle and his brother were disowned by Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. And it was only a little bit later, within the 1780s, he fell into financial distress. He was also outside of his community, while his wife remained a member within the community. All of this took a mental toll, and he eventually approached the Friends asking for forgiveness and reinstatement. So we fast forward to 1790, and he really wants to help lead this idea. Now, also in 1790, and the gentleman that we see just to the left of the plan is John Dickinson. And we might be familiar with that name, kind of remembering, all right, our idea of signers of the Constitution. We think of Dickinson College. Well, John Dickinson gave a gift of one full lot of land in Philadelphia. And that gift in 1790 became the first large financial contribution in the interest of opening a new school. Prior to that, subscriptions, folks giving what they could, but this was a sizable gift. Now, the gift of the parcel of land wasn't intended to be where the school would be. It was intended really for the revenue, the money. So that third element. Well, actually, we can call it the first element because we haven't even gotten to the students and teachers yet. One quote that from John Dickinson in a letter in 1788 I thought was pretty interesting. He said, well, the establishment mentioned prior within the letter, should be fixed, not nearer than 20 miles or further than 30 miles from Philadelphia. A tract of good land, well wooded and watered, at least 500 acres. When we think about Westtown School today, it's a little bit, at this point, past 30 miles from Philadelphia, but close. And we think about how he described the school, it's pretty accurate. By the way, John Dickinson later became a signer of the Constitution from Delaware, and he was also known as the penman of the Revolution, really just providing ideas through words. We can see an early map, and it's later than a 1795 map, but the plans eventually came to actualization in about 1794 when Philadelphia Yearly Meeting they negotiated, figured out of 3 possible locations, began to negotiate with the Gibbons family. And by this point, James Gibbons, sort of the third of a long line of Gibbons, they negotiated the purchase of their farm. Yes, yes. So now this begins to jumpstart, well, what would this Quaker education look like? We've talked about, okay, the money, the land, the purchase. Now we need to begin to think about the students. So in a practical sense, we have some words from William Penn, which would help guide our thoughts. In a pretty early tract when William Penn was considering, how do I want my own children to be taught to learn, and how should Quaker children also receive an education? Not really his words, but what sort of learning? There were 2 phrases that came to mind. Quaker education was to be useful and practical, and would emphasize Christian and moral instruction. So when we boil that down, we think, okay, students are they're doing practical things. Of course, they're going to learn some concepts and theories, but it should be practical and useful. And there has to be a thread, has to be a line that's helping them morally grow into a good person. So some questions that I began to think, around this time. How would this area, how would the township, with its natural resources, its farming tradition, and we know sort of the landscape, the backdrop of Quaker families and area meeting houses, how would that shape the student experience? And even conversely, how would, once we bring the students and the teachers together, how would the school itself shape the experience of these families, as well as future residents within the township? I think those two ideas of useful and practical in Christian and moral instruction are one ways to conceptualize what they were thinking as they began to develop the school. So the ideas percolating in the 1780s, 1790s, purchase 1794. By 1799, now we're bringing students, actual children from within primarily Philadelphia and Philadelphia area out here. And Westtown's curriculum from its earliest roots and even up to today has been shaped by the land, by the natural environment within this township and the areas. In terms of original curriculum, it started with what would seem familiar to us, the standard pillars. There's going to be spelling, reading, writing, arithmetic, yes. And for girls, needlework, and for boys, map making. But within a few decades, prior to the mid 1800s, students began to send letters home saying, there are some other things that we're studying and we're doing with teachers that's especially exciting. These included botany, so collecting a little bit of the flora and the fauna of the area, geology, bird watching, and other pursuits that when we think about ourselves within the township, we probably do on the weekends ourselves. I could take a poll and say, how many of us have a garden? How many of us watch birds? How many of us are intrigued by the deer and foxes and other things running across our lawns? Well, the students were finding themselves having the same experience, and the teachers said, our curriculum actually needs to support that. Reading, writing, studying Latin, important, but this is actually just as important. Some of the pictures I included just within this slide, we see students really driven by their curiosity. So we see a student who's working with beehives, perhaps collecting honey. We see students along the Chester Creek who are probably collecting samples from the creek. I have a colleague in the upper right-hand corner who every fall he's a history teacher, and he takes his students out to Birmingham Friends Meeting House to really talk about both the American Revolution, the Battle of Brandywine, and to tie it to Friends' participation within that arena. So even today, that thread of useful and practical knowledge really means, well, there are ways that we have to tap into the township's natural resources. We have to tap into the historic sites. We actually have to help our students really learn about the land and the history of this area, not through a book always. We begin with a book, but really by going out into the field and by using the campus. So as we consider the historical direction of these learning experiences, how the curriculum began to incorporate the land and the natural environment, the area, there was also tied in that idea of moral instruction. And it really was brought to heart by a set of some core Quaker principles, and we call them testimonies. But at their very heart, they were really some elements that we would say, well, what binds uh, families together? What's the common thread among various meeting houses? What are some of the ideas that we really want to perpetuate, to our children and our children's children? And it's a set of some ideas: simplicity, peace, equality, integrity in your words and your actions, community, and then stewardship, really kind of caring about all those things that are within our care in any given moment. While these principles never really determined the curriculum, the curriculum was never set on trying to match one for one what these principles were. The underlying notion was that each would be reflective in the school's program. I want to read a quote from a former head of school, Thomas Casemeyer, and he wrote this in around the late 1960s. And he was talking about how peace and harmony really fit in. He says, "I like to think that Westtown School is uniquely suited to enable competing groups or individuals to reach resolution on any given issue. However, it must be remembered that resolution on some issues is never found, but demands constant vigilance, patience, and some pain." We think about, you know, our world today, and I always think about, okay, the classroom environment for my students today. I have to remind myself by those same thoughts. Sometimes we have conflicts that aren't easily resolved, but there's a long trajectory to it. So having a school in a township that has a long-standing rich farming tradition inevitably leads to using the campus as a classroom. And this concept developed gradually and informally, first in the early 1800s from the necessary tasks, in which students had to tend the gardens, had to collect fruit from the fruit orchards, and occasionally had to put in some hours, some work on the leased farm. But over time, the school built new features that supported this agricultural foundation. And I'll just mention a few, some dates and what I think are kind of some important ideas to this idea of campus as classroom. So by 1795, a sawmill was brought to campus to provide lumber. It's adding to the school is both farm as well as a place for learning. By 1865, there was a small skating pond, and the skating pond was really originally thought, well, this is one way to provide ice, and we'll have a nearby ice house to have the ice handy. And then I'll talk about this just a little bit later. By 1912, a full inland lake, and we're pretty familiar with Westtown Lake for similar purposes. But then adding, you know what? There's also a benefit of recreation. and community. Within these pictures, we can see the idea of campus as a classroom, students collecting fruit from the orchards, the inland lake as a place of community building and some fun recreation, as well as bird watching, and that photos from 1902. Buildings also fall within this category. And I was going back and forth. I was thinking, there's so many buildings at Westtown School that I could mention where the building itself is a classroom. And I'm not talking about, okay, well, there's a classroom in this building. No, you walk around the building and you see chimneys and bricks and old features, that the building itself is a classroom. Well, I wanted to highlight what's called the Westtown Farmhouse. And originally, this building was the old house. Well, I should say it was the structural site of the old house of James Gibbons. And we can consider kind of the building structural site is the oldest part of campus. By 1799, it was already close to 100 years old. This photo in the building today shows that original building was torn down and then rebuilt. So this photo shows the building that replaced the Gibbons house with a new farmhouse. And at the time in 1850, building this cost $6,500. Not a small amount. In today's terms, that would be about 260,000. So yeah, so when we think of it today, we go, oh, actually, that's pretty reasonable. Now this picture, it's not color, but if you were to come on campus and visit the site, you would notice that the gray basalt bluestone used in its construction, it's locally quarried, and it links it with other buildings in Westtown Township that have that basalt bluestone facade, which really kind of points to the mid-19th century, mid-1800s. Now, a couple fun facts, interesting note, in 1947, perhaps those of us who might remember when Westtown Farmhouse was in action as a place for public dining. Breakfast was served for 75 cents. Lunch was served for $1.10. And dinner was just $1.50 per person. So you could get a good country meal for not too much money. Okay, so I want to take another moment and have us just consider a question. As we think about the last couple centuries, 1800s, 1900s, what aspects of our township and Westtown School might we see as mutually evolving over these last 2 centuries? And I have to confess that I was ready to throw in a bunch of slides of several intersections of the township, the area, and the school. But for the sake of time, I had to rein myself in, and I'm going to lift up 2 important aspects of the school that really intersect with the evolution also of the township. So first is the Westtown Farm, and I'm sure that many longtime residents of Westtown Township have fond memories of the farm over the years, especially fond memories perhaps of Pete's Produce Farm. It was a steady stand in the summer where you could buy crops that you knew were produced right there on the farm that you could see. There was honey that was gathered from the local beehives. And when Pete retired, I think Inger and I, we must have bought about 8 jars of honey, and especially delicious fruit pies made by local area bakers and perhaps Amy Flynn, Pete's wife. But if we go back for a moment to the early roots, throughout the early 1800s, the school had farming and dairy operations that were working full tilt to provide food and revenue for the school. So a few things just to note. In 1903, the dairy produced close to 130,000 quarts of milk that were used directly for the school, as well as sold locally among the area. And then any overflow was shipped down Street Road to Philadelphia. In 1904, the school farm produced, among crops, hay, wheat, oats, potatoes, corn, as well as dairy products, milk, cream, and butter, and even meat, beef, veal, mutton, and pork. If we move forward to the 1920s, and I'll talk about this quote in a minute, the farm and its significance was formally added back to the educational program. Teachers saw its significance, even though it was a leased farm. They thought, well, our students should have some role within this. So from a catalog from the 1928-29 school year, it says, keep before the students a sense of the dignity of agricultural pursuits and to give them a vision of the opportunities for social and civic service in country and their communities. So attaching back to that idea that William Penn had, we want a practical and useful education and an element of moral instruction. By the 1940s, and we know in the context of World War II, there was a tremendous labor shortage. Students were called into service on the farm and in the school orchards. There's a fascinating section from the school's general committee minutes that include, school was dismissed on 4th day, 10th month, 7, in order to help harvest crops. Students and faculty husked a 7-acre cornfield, picked 1,700 bushels of apples at Westtown and on 2 neighboring farms, took in many bushels of beets and carrots. It was a profitable and enjoyable experience for the whole group. Not sure how enjoyable it was while you're kind of moving those bushels around, but that idea of working the land and being in community afterwards is enjoyable. When we consider the annual maple syrup project that was begun by a teacher in 1921 and even continues today with one of our teachers who leads outdoor education, students really did get their hands dirty in bringing food from farm to table. And we're used to that phrase now, farm to table, okay, this is, what we want. Well, during the time, it was necessary. Second thing I'd just like to lift up, I'm sure that our longtime residents remember the evolution of Westtown School's lake. Not so much the evolution of the lake itself, but certainly its programs, summer camps, and uses. I'm in my 11th year at the school, and for the first year and a half, the school had to perform, and you might remember this, a dredging project that involved emptying the entire lake, taking out invasive species, and building a completely new dam structure. And then afterwards, restoring all of the lake's water. There's a really interesting account from a member of Westtown's class of 1868 who recalled the original building of a dam in order to provide for a lake. And at that point, it was just a small skating pond. But he says, no student of the winter of 1864-65 will ever forget the intense interest which was aroused by the project of building a dam across the horseshoe bend of the race or the course of the Chester Creek. A weak dam backed the water over nearly 5 acres and gave to Westtown children such skating as they had never known before. It also made the first break in the complete separation between the two sides of the house. So for the first time, girls not only used the pond, but they used it with boys. And that was in 1868. And I'm wrapping this up. By 1897, a larger lake was proposed when the skating pond and old dam was in constant need of repair, and the programs had also grown in the 1800s, incorporating students' interest. And the idea was that this could also incorporate the recreation, such as canoeing and even more skating. So in 1911, the General Committee finally approved this idea from 1897, and the lake as we know it today was dedicated in 1912. Now, for many of us township residents, the lake affords a place for leisurely walks, and there are several paths around the lake for bird watching. A couple years ago, we knew of 2 eaglets who had been born, and we were always on the lookout for the eagles. Not to pun there. I'm always lookout for the eagles. Yes, go birds. Go Westtown Township birds. And as well as our children, sometimes if they take part in Westtown School summer camp, learning to canoe for the first time. All right. So finally, this brings us to Westtown School and Westtown Township today. I think of this as partnering and partnership. As neighbors and partners, we want to evolve in coordination with an increasingly growing Westtown Township. Now, the history teacher in me loves the cool aspects of the past, especially delving into the deep Quaker roots within our area and the school's relation to it. But, and I'll leave this as just a final note, we're also committed to sharing these same Quaker principles forward with our current generation of students, especially those from Westtown Township who experience our campus as their own classroom, as well as our township as their home. Thank you so much. Probably didn't heed the advice of my students and went a little bit longer, but I would love to field any questions, and anything that I might not answer, I'll also pass it off to some friends. No. So that's a great question. The school did go through a period where it was for Quaker families. Today, and this has been true over close to a century now, where non-Quaker students, and they actually make up our majority. Yes, yeah. So thank you. Wow, these questions are awesome. So my role, I'm chair of sort of a combined history and religion department. And by training and my own classes, I'm a history teacher. But within our religion department, our program includes, for students new to the school, Quakerism. So they'll study, at least become familiar with some of those ideas and concepts that I lightly shared today. And students will also have some required courses in what we call world religions. So they become also with other elements of Christianity, with Judaism, with Islam, as well as Eastern religions, Buddhism, Hinduism.
From around the world.
Around the world. Yeah, we're really lucky and fortunate that we have a number of students who are, in some cases, commuting from across the street, and others who have traveled from parts of Europe, Africa, Asia, and a recent graduate from New Zealand.
School originally, was it for richer Quakers who sent kids there, or was it who paid tuitions? Was it the family who had that?
It's a great question. So, and sorry, I'm always saying that's a great question, but these are great questions. So the school, and we want to put this also in the context, say, of Quaker communities. Within any sort of community, especially one of, say, a shared religious tradition, there are going to be certain families who the finances, the materials come easily because of perhaps business decisions, and others where they're making ends meet. And the school always had in place, and it was, I would say, less of a byproduct necessarily of Westtown School, more of a byproduct of Quaker communities, and understanding that those students who might not have the means, we will find the means to help them along. Certainly, as we go through kind of list of names, there are certain names that pop up where you might feel, oh, okay, this is a familiar name, and I didn't know that it was perhaps a Quaker family, but the vast majority are going to be from families with modest means, and the community was really helping to send the students. Yeah, please.
Just to chime in and give a little bit of information, sort of, can you hear me okay? Well, I don't know if there's. I can wander around with it. In terms of our current student population, there was we have, just to give you precise numbers, we have 693 students at Westtown this year. That's pre-K through 12. And when we're talking about the boarding portion of our school, we only have residential students in the upper school. That's in 9th through 12th grade. None of our younger students, pre-K through 8, are boarding students. They are all local. We have 360 some odd students in the upper school. Of those, about 70% of them board. And some of those boarders are from the local area. They're also, as Joseph had said, from all over the country, all over the world. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 22-ish% are international students. So we have students from all over the place. In terms of coming from Quakers of greater financial means originally or not, Joseph addressed that. As we think about our current population, we remain as Westtown has always been, a tuition-driven school. And so there is a degree to which tuition is sort of the largest contributor to our operating budget. There is also philanthropy, auxiliary programs, a variety of other things. That said, we This past year, we awarded $12 million in financial aid. 98% of that was need-based aid. There's a tiny little sort of sliver of merit aid. But again, we're committed to both balancing the need that being a tuition-driven institution presents itself and trying to make a Westtown education accessible for many, many, many different folks from all over the place. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Chris. Steve?
Just if you were about school, give us an estimate of how many students over years educated at Westtown.
Ooh, wow, that's a great question. Sarah, do you have?
Yes, honestly, we just for like 1799 to 1945, we have like a catalog, and that itself is like pretty thick book. And that's how we get counted, honestly, 1945. I don't know if we can make sense of it. It's a thousand.
1799, we began with 20 boys, 20 girls. And I kind of lift that up because as we talked about those core principles or the Quaker testimonies, equality was, an important feature. And we actually were the first boarding school that would have, say, what today we call coeducational. So we start with 20 boys, 20 girls. And then over the years, kind of magnified out to what Chris mentioned today, when any given year, having about a little bit over 600 students within our classrooms.
If I'm hard, one of the other reasons that it's tricky to make an estimate about that, and probably figure this out, but not standing here today, is also once upon a time, Westtown was not, sorry, you're bringing your necks around. Westtown didn't offer diplomas, was not a degree granting institution until the 1860s. It was a place, a full day's carriage ride away from the city for Quaker children, as Joseph was talking about, to be educated, to receive what was sort of described as a guarded education away from some of those negative influences of the non-Quaker aspects of the city. And so there were students of a range of different ages who were not necessarily there moving through a program to sort of a terminal degree of any sort, but they were there and they learned for whatever period of time they were there, and then they moved on again. So it was a little bit more fluid in the early days and functioning at a smaller scale. Our graduating classes tend to be somewhere roughly between 90 and 100 students each year. So just in the 22 non-consecutive years that I have worked at Westtown since 1998, you figure that's a couple of thousand students who have graduated just in my time there at the school. So certainly in the I don't know,
Tens of thousands.
yes, yeah, but more specifically, I don't know, we'd have to go crunch some numbers and Sarah would have to dig through some of those thick books.
Yes.
Size of the school, the big ball built in 1799, or did you have
Over the years. So we can think of, say, layers of buildings, and certainly it started with this concept of students, teachers, location. So there was the farmhouse structure that was really the only structure there before 1799. And that was deemed, okay, this is to serve as a place of hospitality, of reception, a place where those visiting the campus, bringing their children, can stay for a certain amount of time. But then there was a building that we need for education to happen. And the initial, let's say, early to mid 1800s. We had building after building, in some cases not permanent structures, but really built to suit the needs of students, as well as to provide for the needs, a lot of cases, of the farm. So nice house structure, sawmill structure, a place where students had, say, a pest house. So these were built. Fast forward, end of the 1800s, early 1900s, that's when we see a number of permanent structures. And if I think about the main building today, Sarah, do you recall? Because that wasn't the original sort of main structure. It was kind of replaced what originally was there. The main building, I think, goes back to 1888. Great.
What role, if any, did the school have in the underground?
Oh, that's a great question. Great question. May have to hunt that to Sarah.
As far as I understand it, and this is something that I kind of want to do a little bit more research into myself, we have sort of a vague reference to it. There was a house on campus that I believe Enoch Lewis worked for the school for a short period of time. He was a pretty prominent abolitionist. And we have sort of a quote from his son that sort of references the possibility that he may have housed fugitive former enslaved people, but we don't, the house no longer stands. And so we aren't able to do any of the sort of more specific archaeological kind of excavation to determine that. So it's just sort of that one reference that we have. So we can't say for 100%, we don't know for sure, but there is a possibility that he may have had some sort of involvement while he was on the faculty of the school.
If I can add just one thing that's kind of parallel also, some of our earliest Japanese students at Westtown arrived in part due to the Japanese families that are being relocated into concentration areas during World War II. So we do have within our yearbooks the school's history within trying to provide them with stability. There's a question in the back.
Hi, I'm Stephen Lyons. I'm with Friends of Shiloh AMA Church and Cemetery. It's where AMA Church dating back to 1817, one of the earliest connection churches established in the country. And the unique connection between the AMA Church and Westtown and Quaker history is extraordinary. And there is a footprint of an underground railroad network extensively through this community. In a 3-mile radius of Shiloh is a profound history. I know 5 Westtown Road was part of 198 acres of land that John Forsyth, who was the first schoolmaster at Westtown, bought for his children John, James, and Hannah. And the Forsyths owned this property for some 100 plus years. They loved this property, they cared for it. And they were facilitators of light, of education. And John Forsyth of Birmingham Meeting was tasked with ministering to the Black community, see to their needs. He was a colleague of Richard Strode, who was a member of the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society. We know for a fact in 1803, Enoch Lewis, who moved into John Forsyth's cottage at Westtown School, was a major abolitionist. And he went so far as to, in 1803, manumit a man who was free already, was abducted by slave catchers. 1803. There was a theory it might be either Jacob or Richard Few, who lived at Darlington's Corner, across from Darlington Inn. And he is listed on the Shiloh AME Church deed. We know that Alfred I, one of the United States colored troops buried at Shiloh, worked at Barnard Station, Lorraine Lucas and Don McKay, who was refurbishing that extraordinary Underground Railroad station, to which Thomas Garrett assisted Harriet Tubman coming north. 52 is just 4 miles from Shiloh. Shiloh predates that history. It predates Thornbury PLD. It is profound and deeply moving history. 20 Ellis Lane, corner of Ellis and Strasburg Road, 1822, belonged to Daniel Curry. He owned 37 acres of land. He was African American. He was a farmer, blacksmith. He is the great great grandfather to buy Westtown. 3-mile radius. And the Forsyth property is falling into demolition by neglect by a scrupulous developer who for 23 years has allowed this property to deteriorate and rot. West Township, the township I grew up in, straddling the line of Westtown. You know what their heritage site is? They have one heritage site. The American Helicopter Museum. One of the earliest townships in the country, established in 1704. It is humbling. It is humbling. There's an account I read in Westtown Miscellany in 1837, which blows my mind. These young people were on fire with the spirit of abolition, and now this godless administration in Washington, D.C. dares to erase Harriet Tubman from the National Park Service website. We have a sacred obligation to honor the tradition of abolition and Underground Railroad education. Thank you, Westtown School. Tremendous work you've done in our community over generations, inspiring us to follow the path of the daughters of light. The women of this county are inspiring to me. Dr. Ann Preston, Graciana Lewis, who is a descendant of Robert Williams at Goshen Meeting, who was the king of Goshen, is humbling. So I just wanted to say that we have some serious problems happening. 905 Westtown Road, which is falling in. But we are not acknowledging the things.
Sir?
Yes, ma'am.
You're so passionate, I know it's stuck Westtown School, so.
But
Yeah.
that's the problem.
These guys are here giving the time, we're all here to lecture on Westtown School. Can we get back to that? Thank you.
Yeah.
What we thank, Westtown School. That was what we had to wrap up this point. And the reason why we have to wrap up is that an hour from now, we have yet another event happening over at on Lee Street and Howe, where we will be dedicating a marker to the historic Dewey family. So anybody who's interested in that can drop in over there. One last thing about Westtown School, which many people, many residents have asked me about, and that is Westtown, is the property of Westtown School at all open to visitors from the township?
I'll let Chris answer. Yeah, please.
So.
Thank you.
Is it better with this? Okay. When in doubt. So first, short answer, yes, in some ways. And let me also just acknowledge that we want to be able to be open and welcoming. And we're also a school that has children there in our care, moving all about the campus 24 hours a day. I mean, in the middle of the night, I hope they're not moving all over campus, but they are there in our care 24 hours a day, as opposed to a day school when there are sort of clear ends to school hours. And that really complicates our sense of how and when we welcome folks to come and wander about campus and when we don't. There are neighbors who come and walk on campus, walk their dogs on campus. We welcome that. Please keep your dog leashed and pick up after yourself. Be mindful that these are young folks who are in essentially their home, in many cases home away from home as they're moving about. There are people who will walk down by the lake. We welcome that as well. We don't welcome, unfortunately, at this time, to have people sort of bring their boats and paddle around on Westtown Lake or swim in Westtown Lake at this point. In this day and age, if you think about the liability concerns that get attached to all manner of different things, but we do also want folks to be able to come and take a walk. You're very, very welcome. If there are particular things that you're interested in coming and learning more about, because I'm thinking about this both from the just, it's a beautiful day, let's take a walk, and I want to learn more about the history of Westtown School. There are the folks you can reach out to, like Joseph, like Sarah, who would be happy to help you navigate some of that. There are also athletic events, if somebody wants to come and watch an athletic event. There are plays, there are lectures that we would welcome people to come to. And I'm going to hand this to Ann Burns, our Dean of Communications, who can tell you exactly where to find some of that information and some other FAQs on the website. Is that fair, Ann?
Hello. We do have a newsletter that is available for our township residents, our neighbors, and is located on our website. The easiest way to find it, it's either under About Us, and there's a section for our neighbors, which you can sign up for the newsletter, which we send out periodically, different opportunities, as well as a section all about our land use. So if you're curious about something that's happening on campus, there's a link to that information there. If you can't find it, you can just search in the search bar neighbors, and you'll find that exact section. Please do sign up. We have a small but energized list of community members who receive our communications. You can always send an email to me if you have a question. The easiest way to reach me is communications@Westtown or ann.burns, but communications might be easier to remember. It's westtown.edu. Thanks so much. And I'll be here if anybody has any questions.
We often get questions about sort of what kind of land are we preserving in what ways, and some of that information is there on the website, but we're also happy to try to connect with folks. There are lots of people who are not terribly interested in getting notices from us about what's going on campus and feel pestered by that kind of thing. At the same time, if you're interested, let us know. We would be delighted for you to have that information, and in this day and age, electronically is probably the best way to do that.
We also have several social media accounts which are listed on that page. We have a flagship account for Westtown School on Facebook and Instagram. We have also an athletic account, Westtown Athletics. We would love if you would follow us. You'll see more of an inside view into what's happening in our curriculum.
And Joseph has cards here. He'll be happy to hand you.